Hello and welcome to the Council of State Governments Midwestern Legislative Conference webinar about anaerobic digesters. My name is Becky Leese and I serve as the staff liaison for the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, which is hosting today's event. I'm joined today by my colleague John Davis, who is the liaison for the MLC Energy and Environment Committee, as well as Jess Lenhart, who is the director for the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus. Both helped promote today's event as the topic is fitting for their work as well. I'm also joined by Christina Luperini, who will be helping me run the webinar. Today's event is being recorded. So just as a couple of housekeeping matters, keep that in mind. The recording will be made available on the CSG website later this week. Please mute your audio, and we'll take some questions and comments halfway through the presentation. And then again at the end, you can type your question in the chat feature, or you can use the raise your hand feature at the bottom. As I previously mentioned, our event is sponsored by our MLC committee, along with the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus. I would like to thank the respective officers for their work and leadership and guidance in making events like this possible. As for the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, MLA Bonk and Representative Thomas were traveling and unable to attend today, but joining us is Kansas State Senator and co-chair of our committee, Senator Francisco. She graciously agreed to moderate today's event. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to you, Marcy.
Thank you, Becky. And thank you to my colleagues on the other committees for helping host this event, and to all of you who've joined us today. A special thank you to our presenters for the time and effort they've put into preparing for today's session. We're going to be discussing the use of manure digesters, or as a more pleasing and technical name, anaerobic digesters. Today's webinar will include an overview of anaerobic digesters and how they reduce methane gas, an overview of the Ag Star program, policies and financial programs related to anaerobic digestion, and we'll have some time for questions and answers and a bit of discussion. So today we have two really good presenters lined up. The first one is Jake Dunton, and this is the order that they're going to be presenting. Jake works for the EPA's Climate Change Division as a manager for the Ag Star program. In his role, he works with the U.S. livestock industry, state and federal agencies, and the biogas industry to advance deployment of methane recovery projects. Mr. Dunton also supports the Global Methane Initiative, advancing anaerobic digestion of organic feedstocks globally for methane mitigation and energy production. Prior to joining the EPA, he worked for the USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service. Mr. Dunton was also a Peace Corps Masters International graduate from the University of Washington. He served Senegal in the agroforestry sector and studied agricultural land use policy and land tenure in developing countries. After Jake's presentation, Nick Elger will walk us through some policy considerations. Mr. Elger is the program manager for the Climate Change Division with the US EPA, where he supports methane mitigation efforts in agriculture, municipal solid waste, and oil and gas sectors. Through his work supporting the Ag Star program, Global Methane Initiative, and methane emissions reduction program, Nick helps advance deployment of methane recovery projects in the United States and globally. Mr. Elgers studied environmental policy and corporate sustainability at the University of Minnesota and holds a Master of Business Administration from George Washington University.
All right, Jake, I'll let you take over and share your screen and take it from there.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you, Senator Francisco. I'm going to switch over to my presentation now. All right, is everyone able to see that?
Yes.
Excellent. So hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Anaerobic Digestion Basics and Supporting Policies. My name is Jake Dunton, and with Nick Elger, I manage the EPA's AgStar program. We are excited to be discussing this topic with you all and want to thank you for attending. So we have a lot to share with you today, so we're just going to dive right in. Here's what we're going to cover. I'm going to introduce the EPA AgStar program and describe how anaerobic digestion works in the agricultural sector. And then Nick is going to provide some state and federal policies that are related to AD project implementation. Lastly, we're going to reserve some time for questions and answers, and we'll have a little bit of time in the middle for questions and answers as well. So methane mitigation is an important priority for the Congress, the Biden administration, and all federal agencies. These are the policies and strategies listed that highlight targeting methane emissions from U.S. sectors as a critical facet to address climate change. Anaerobic digestion is identified as a tool to reduce methane emissions. As I mentioned, I'm program manager for EPA's AgStar program, and AgStar is a partnership program that is sponsored by the EPA and USDA. We work cooperatively to promote biogas recovery systems in the agriculture sector. We do this by assisting farmers, public organizations like universities and NGOs, and the private sector in planning and implementation of AD projects. So some of you may be wondering why the Biden administration, the EPA, and other agencies are targeting methane specifically. The chart on this slide shows the greenhouse gas emissions by gas, and the blue section is the methane emissions. So although methane emissions are much lower compared to CO2, methane is 28 times more effective at warming than CO2 is. Additionally, methane emissions also contribute to ground level ozone, which is a health risk. However, there is some good news. Methane breaks down in the atmosphere in about 12 years, meaning that reductions in methane emissions can have observable impacts on climate change within our lifetimes. Additionally, if captured, methane can be used as a renewable energy source. Sorry about that. So this slide shows the U.S. methane emissions by sector. The green portions are the emissions from the livestock production, and the circled section are the emissions from manure management. This is where AgStar works with partners. So just for reference, in 2021, emissions from livestock manure were the equivalent to the emissions from 14.7 million cars driven for a year, or the emissions from 12.8 million homes' electricity use for a year. So one thing I wanted to highlight is that this chart provides a general frame reference for the methane emission reductions from several types of manure management practices. Each leaf represents approximately 10% methane emissions as compared to an uncovered manure lagoon. So as you can see, anaerobic digestion is at the top, providing the most emission reductions. But I like to provide this context because while AD is powerful, it is a tool in the toolbox as opposed to the sole option. So here is a picture of an example of an anaerobic digester, and now I'm going to give you a brief overview of the process of capturing methane via anaerobic digestion. So anaerobic digestion is a natural process in which microorganisms break down organic matter, such as animal manure, wastewater biosolids, and food waste in the absence of oxygen. At the top, you can see some examples of food stocks. The food stock is transferred to the AD system, which houses a heating element and bacteria. The bacteria convert the feedstock into biogas and digestate. Biogas is a mixture of methane, carbon dioxide, and some trace gases such as water vapor, hydrogen sulfide, and nitrogen oxides. The biogas is a renewable energy-rich gas that can be used on-site for heat and power or upgraded and used for vehicle fuel or pipeline renewable natural gas. The digestate are solids and liquids that are nutrient-rich and have a variety of different uses. Here are some examples of different digesters found on farms in the agricultural production sector. There are a variety of technical designs for AD systems that will fit the goals of each project best. There are many factors that go into the decision for a digester type, including regional climate, financial cost, type of feedstock, and the goals of the end biogas use. Thorough project planning is critical to a successful implementation and management of an AD project. So one of the reasons that AD projects tend to be powerful and a preferred system for manure management are all of the co-benefits. Over the next couple slides, we're going to discuss the environmental, economic, and energy benefits of AD systems. Local communities experience some positive impacts from AD systems. Biogas capture lowers the risk of respiratory illnesses due to reductions in ground level ozone and ammonia from uncovered manure lagoons. Additionally, ADs can reduce odors from farms and ranches. On the AgStar website, we have dozens of case studies and testimonials from the co-benefits seen by farmers and ranchers after installing an anaerobic digester. For example, Patterson Farm demonstrated one of the most noticeable improvements that an AD system can have for a local community. Reducing odors can generate leaps and bounds of positive influence for farming communities and local municipalities. Sealed ADs also reduce the instances of pathogens and manures from leaching into the surface and groundwater. Many pathogens are destroyed in the AD system. The raw manure feedstock is gathered and then converted into digestate, which is a potent fertilizer that can be applied or utilized in a much more controlled way. We have seen instances of digestate being reapplied to fields, converted to animal bedding, or sold as valuable fertilizer. So please feel free to mute during this section, and then we'll have questions and answers in a little bit. Thank you. So the biogas from an AD system can be utilized as a renewable energy source for the farm. It can also be routed to the AD itself, creating a cyclical system requiring very little outside energy input. Financial incentives for the energy can also be a powerful motivating factor for the farms. The biogas can be upgraded from its original form and sold for vehicle fuel, injected into a natural gas pipeline, or sold to the electrical grid, known as net metering. Butler Farms in North Carolina utilizes its AD system for local electricity, net metering, and carbon credits. This system provides sustainable energy generation for the farm and a diversified income. Depending on how the AD system and management is designed, it can provide myriad economic benefits to the community. ADs can provide diversified farm income and cost savings from food production. Also, construction, maintenance, and management of AD systems all require local specialized jobs. Also, some farm digesters partner with local businesses to take in feedstocks such as food and organic waste. Farms near food production facilities such as grocery products and pet food can take advantage of unsalable foods to power its ADs. The Barstow Farm in Massachusetts utilizes co-digestion of various feedstocks. Food and organic waste diverted to an AD can provide more biogas and energy than manure alone. The financial management or relationship for Barstow and the local food distributors is symbiotic. It lowers the waste management costs for the food producers and increases the revenue via tipping fees. So the AgStar program tracks a number of ADs currently in operation and under construction in the United States. This is a map showing the active digesters and where they are currently found. In the Midwest region, most digesters are medium-sized dairy farms and some large swine farms. The size of the circle indicates the relative number of animals at that farm. Many farms utilize co-digestion, which means different feedstocks are combined. So these data and maps are available free of charge at the AgStar website. So here is a chart showing the number of ADs over time since the year 2000 in the United States. As you can see, the number of digesters has been rising over this period, and we expect it to continue to rise as more focus is given to methane mitigation practices and the numerous financial incentives recently introduced. AgStar estimates that farms with either 500 cows or 2,000 pigs can support a feasible anaerobic digester system. This means that there is a potential for over 8,000 anaerobic digesters in the United States. So we just hit the halfway point of the slide, so I think we can take a few questions.
If you have any questions, feel free to jump into the chat or use the raise the hand feature. Jake, I have one for you about how to upgrade the gas to make it to feed it into the pipeline system. Do you know how that process works, or how is the biogas that's generated from the anaerobic digesters then converted to be something that can be put into that existing natural gas pipeline?
Sure. So typically the biogas is transferred to an upgrade site. It can be upgraded at site or transported to an upgrader. It's then cleaned, and the hydrogen sulfide and nitrogen oxides are removed. And additionally, it's biogas, when it comes out of the digester, is between 40 to 60% methane, and it needs to be about 99% methane in order to be injected into the pipeline. And so it is also concentrated at that time.
Good question. Are there others? If not, thank you again, Jake. We can return to more questions later. So if
We
come
do
up,
have we do have a
Oh.
question from Cheryl Rubel.
oh, good.
Hey, hi, thank you very much. I have a concern about the management of the digestate, the waste product from anaerobic digestion. The amount of nutrients does not change. And they're, but they are chemically altered. They are more water soluble, which means agronomic rates might need to be adjusted, but I see really no evidence in my research that NPDES permits, nutrient management plans are addressing the altered nature of the nutrients in the digestate. Can you please address that question? Thank you.
Sure. So I think I can hit a couple parts of it, and then Nick, feel free to jump in if I miss anything. So I will say that, yes, I don't think the nutrients are necessarily at a higher concentration, as you mentioned, but having a digester system and the digestate allows for the farmer or ranch to utilize it in a much more controlled way, so they are able to spread it when they want to, as opposed to just trying to get rid of it. As well, I think the chemical composition is changed, and so you're able to have a solid digestate and a liquid digestate, which can be utilized in different ways. So one of the examples that we're going to go over is a way that solid digestate can be used. Some farms choose to use the solid digestate as animal bedding or as a co-product that they then sell.
Thank you. That I do understand that, and I agree that the nutrient content doesn't change, and that if you employ additional processes, which cost more money, that you can separate the solid and liquid fractions and have more control. But my understanding is that not all digester projects, take on that extra expense. So that's an issue, and I'm also concerned about the fact that these anaerobic digester projects, the financial viability without generous taxpayer support and, the environmental commodities created by state low carbon fuel standards, like California's low carbon fuel standard. Even, in California, they're actually considering removing manure biogas as a qualifying, biofuel under their low carbon fuel standard program, because it is not promoting electrification as hoped. So I'll stop there. I don't mean to be so negative, but I have great concerns.
No, I think that's fair. You brought up some really good points. I will say that one of the ways that we like to frame anaerobic digestion is that it's a tool in the toolbox. It's not going to be a one size fits all for every situation, and looking over all of those factors is an important part of a pre-feasibility study.
So this is Senator Francisco. I'll add a question. Does it make a difference if a farm or group of farmers can make use of the methane directly from the anaerobic digesters, or if they try to put it into our overall fuel systems?
Absolutely. So there are a myriad of examples of both situations. So sometimes farms will choose to have a cyclical electrical system where they'll use the biogas to power or provide combined heat and power to the farm itself. And then other times they'll choose to combine their biogas with other farms in a cluster. And then they will then inject an upgraded gas into the pipeline.
All right, thank you, Jake. I think it's time that we switch back over to Nick. If you wanted to switch to taking over for your part of the presentation, we'll go for that.
Wonderful. Thanks. And thanks for all the questions. And please feel free to add them to the chat if more questions come up for Jake. And as I'm going through my slides, and Jake, I'll ask that you advance the slides for me. So thanks for having me here, Becky, and the whole group here. My name is Nick Elger. I've been helping to manage the AgStar program for the last 8 years, and have been really excited about the potential for this technology to help provide benefits both environmentally, economically, and socially in communities around the country. And over these next few slides, I'll jump in and share some examples of successful business models for digesters, and as well as talk through some supportive policies at the federal and state level for digesters. So next slide, please, Jake. So when evaluating if a digester is right for your farm, considering the business model is a really key first step. And as Jake had mentioned, there are a number of co-benefits of digesters, and evaluating all the possible co-benefits and sources of revenue for a digester is a key first step. So the energy, of course, is a primary source of revenue for a farm, but the sale and use of digestate on your farm can replace the need to purchase nutrients, fertilizers. You can also use the separated manure solids for animal bedding to save costs there. Bringing in offsite food waste can allow a farm to generate tipping fees. And so, depending on how energy is used for electricity or RNG, renewable natural gas, there's a number of different revenue streams for digesters. Looking at the way the business model is set up, prior to a few years ago, typically digesters on farms were farmer-led and farmer-built and operated with the help of an engineer. The business model has really shifted more so in the last couple of years to third-party investment, ownership, and operating these systems. And there's a number of benefits to that, in that these other companies that help own, develop, and operate the digesters are really specialized in these technologies and can help maintain and efficiently get the project to commercialization and operation. And that takes some of the stress and pressure off a farmer to understand all the complex nature of the system and business model. And so that sort of third-party investment model has really been taking off and proved to be successful in sharing both the risks of the project investment as well as the rewards of the revenue income from these systems. And as well as involving different parties in through the development and operation of these systems throughout the value chain is really key to the success of these projects as well too. So these next couple of slides, I'll dive into a couple of these examples. Next slide. The first project I'll talk about is Barway Farms in Deerfield, Massachusetts. And this is a great example of a third-party owned and operated system. It's built and operated by Vanguard Renewables. And they've also bringing in offsite food waste to this system. So Barway Farm's relatively, in the terms of a farm with a digester, relatively small. There's about 250 cows that are on this site, but they're bringing in a lot of offsite food waste, and that helps generate additional biogas, thus increasing the revenue of the system. And Barway Farm and Vanguard Renewables have a business relationship where both the capital investment, the operation investment, and the revenue are shared. And so that has made this this project very successful. Next slide. This project is out in California, the Kern cluster by California Bioenergy, and it's located in Kern County, California. And what makes this business model unique is that there's a number of farms that are involved in one system or cluster of projects. As you can see in the picture there, the purple, red, and blue and green squares are farms, and connecting those farms are pipelines. And so each of these farms has a digester on them, managing the manure of each of the farms. And the biogas is then directed in a pipeline to a centralized cleanup facility. And that the benefit of that is that the cost of the cleanup can be rather expensive. And so these multiple farms are cost sharing the cost and operations of that cleanup facility, and having a centralized point of injection into the pipeline and fueling of vehicles. And so these projects combine have the equivalent of removing much CO2 as 75,000 passenger cars from the road each year. Next slide. And this last project example is an example of maximizing the co-benefits of digester systems. So Freund Farm in Connecticut is a relatively small farm, around 300 cows there, and they're generating electricity and connecting to the grid, but they're also creating a unique product called cow pots. And these are biodegradable planter pots, which can just, replace the need for plastic or peat moss planter pots. And they're created from the digestate, the manure fibers that are separated and created in these these planter pots. And you can find cow pots on Amazon at local hardware store. So really unique use of the digestate to produce additional revenue for this farm. Next slide. And these next couple slides, I'll talk through the policies and incentives for digesters at the federal and state level. So, and I apologize for the small text here. Jake and I and Becky will make these slides available for you all after this presentation. And we really encourage you all to use this slide deck as a reference guide in the future. So we're happy to share this and make it used in that way. And so at the national level, this slide's covering some of the work that EPA, USDA, and some of the tax credits that are available. So at EPA, the Inflation Reduction Act has made available a lot of money for renewable energy projects, and that can be included of digester systems. So the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Program make available over $30 billion for renewable energy projects, of which AD projects can be applicable for receiving some of that funding. EPA also helps set renewable fuel standard targets, and that's a national program that is trying to use bio-based energy in transportation fuels. And biogas qualifies as a renewable fuel credit and can receive an additional incentive for the sale of that energy if it's used for vehicle fuel. Our partner at USDA also provides grants and loans for projects through their Rural Energy for America program and their EQIP program. Some information here, grants up to $1 million for a project and loans to cover up to 80% of the project. So those have been used and are really impactful incentives at the national level. And then lastly, tax credits, production tax credits and energy tax credits authorized through the Inflation Reduction Act to offset some of the capital cost and the cost of the project. Next slide. And these next slides, I'm going to walk through them rather quickly, but they're different policy mechanisms and some examples at the state level. So as I mentioned, grants and loans at the national level, but as well at the state level, can be very impactful for helping to offset the initial investment of these digester systems. So for example, in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, they have grants that they're making available for digesters. And one I want to particularly highlight is the one in Wisconsin that provides a funding for feasibility studies of a biogas project. And I think what I want to highlight there is one of the biggest barriers or challenges for initiating a digester is the capital cost to do a feasibility study. If a farmer's looking at the potential for a digester on a farm, this is a really useful policy mechanism to help take that first step to see if a digester is right for their farm. Next slide. Performance-based incentives are also a very impactful policy mechanism. For example, in Rhode Island, they created a tariff-based incentive program that was designed to help get more renewable energy projects on the grid. And for example, in 2023, digester systems that were built in Rhode Island could receive an incentive of up to 19 cents per kilowatt hour over 20 years. And that length of contract is also very important for creating financial certainty in this investment, that they'll have a solid and sustainable source of revenue. Next slide. As one of the participants mentioned, there's low carbon fuel standard at the state level as well. California and Oregon have implemented initiatives to try to reduce the carbon intensity of their transportation fuels, and biogas can qualify as a low carbon fuel. So these biogas projects that generate and transform the biogas into vehicle fuel can receive a credit, and that credit can be sold in carbon markets to receive additional revenue for the project. Renewable portfolio standards also are very impactful policies that create a requirement of renewable energy in states' energy use. These have been implemented in a number of states. It's important to note that not all state renewable portfolio standards make digesters a applicable energy source, but that was something to consider, if updating the portfolio standard in your state, to look at making digesters a potential viable technology to receive those incentives. And there's some examples in California and Illinois that we have examples here. Next slide. Net metering and feed-in tariffs, also a great policy. These allow farms to have a consistent revenue stream over the course of the project's lifetime by having a long-term agreement to receive an additional price for the energy that the digester produces when they provide it to the grid. So for example, in Indiana, the Northern Indiana Public Service Company has a special agreement for digesters that hook up to the grid to provide them an additional around 9 cents per kilowatt hour for 15 years for adding that electricity that's produced from projects to the local grid. I mentioned this already, tax credits and other incentives can be really impactful for offsetting the capital costs and the cost of the project over its lifetime. A few examples in Utah and Michigan here to provide incentives for both the production of energy as well as the tax credits for the initial capital investment for digester systems. And so moving away from financial investments, other policies that can be impactful for supporting digesters. One here is organics diversion policies. And so these policies, they've been implemented in a number of states across the country, most notably in the Northeast part of the US. And these policies create our laws to require food waste and other organics to be diverted from landfills to other other end uses, for example, digesters or composting. And so these are impactful for a number of reasons. Keeping the organic waste out of landfills can reduce emissions, and at the landfill site. And if they're diverted to a digester, that can be beneficial for the digester to produce energy, as well as have that methane be captured in a contained system. So in Massachusetts, for example, they have a regulation on the books to ban the disposal of food waste and organic waste from large institutions, banning that waste from going to landfills if they generate more than a half ton of organic waste per week. And they paired that regulation with an incentive to help support the development of digester systems. And so there are a number of systems that were built in Massachusetts to manage that organic waste in standalone food waste digesters, but as well as a number of farms have been identified as sites that could receive that food waste and co-digest it with animal manure at their farms. And the last opportunity that I wanted to note is technical assistance, and want to just iterate the importance of technical assistance to helping support the development and understanding and knowledge sharing of digesters. AgStar is a technical assistance program. We have a lot of tools and resources on our website that help guide farms and developers and folks interested in digesters through the development process and understand anaerobic digestion technologies. But there are also a few examples of state technical assistance programs. And for example, in New York and Vermont, they implemented an ombudsman program where they hired one or multiple individuals that helped livestock farms develop and maintain digester projects. And this was really impactful in helping to scale the number of farms that have digester projects, and to walk farmers through the process and to be a trusted third party that could help them in this process. And a quote here on the right from a farmer in Vermont, and I'm just going to read it here, quote, "I cannot overstate the fact that without the ombudsman, I wouldn't have had my anaerobic digester. I would have been too overwhelmed with the process. The anaerobic digester ombudsman helped provide guidance that was vital to getting my anaerobic digester." End quote there. And I think that just, again, demonstrates the fact that financial assistance is incredibly important. These systems are expensive, but technical assistance is almost equally useful for farmers and to help get these systems built. And so just to summarize the policies and incentives here, walked through a lot of them today. There were a few studies that were done, one by the University of Florida, another by USDA, that looked at the policies and incentives at the state level and the impact that they had on digesters. And these studies found that some of the most effective policies were renewable portfolio standards and performance-based incentives and other mandates that helped increase the consumption and purchase of renewable energy. Performance-based incentives and net metering and incentives that can create a long-term certainty in the value of the energy are really very impactful, and can help both investors and farmers know that they'll have a solid source of revenue through the life of a project. I mentioned this, but for smaller farmers, grants and loans to help defer the capital investment cost and the feasibility studies are really important to help offset that barrier. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions, carbon pricing can be really impactful, and interconnection standards and some net metering policies they found can be less impactful. Next slide. And this last slide just covers a number of key resources that AgStar has developed. And I'll just start with our biogas toolkit, a number of really useful decision-making tools and resources to help guide farmers and developers and anyone interested in digesters through the process of developing and operating these systems. Whether you're just getting started with trying to understand, is a digester right for my farm, to you're in the middle of developing a project and want to understand the best practices for selecting energy use technologies, or setting up your business model, or working with communities to raise awareness of these systems. All of these tools are very useful for helping to move a project forward throughout its life cycle. And that wraps up my portion of the slides. And again, thanks so much, and happy to stay on for as long as we have today to answer any more questions.
We had one comment in the chat from Representative Piez saying that she's used those cow pots for her vegetable gardening and seemingly enjoyed them. I do have a question about how large of a community does an anaerobic digester needed to be situated next to in order to gain the benefits of like transporting their food waste to them, or how big of a gap and distance is it ideally for shipping that waste to the digester?
Yeah, thanks, Becky. A great question. And, it's really going to be location and farm dependent. The economics will, be determined by the cost of transportation and, the availability of feedstock, how much biogas could be produced from that feedstock, and as well as how much biogas is produced at the farm without that. So really hard to say how close. Obviously, I think the big thing is the closer the better. It makes it easier, and reduces the cost of transportation. There are a number of food production facilities that have digesters co-located right there, but those production facilities are places where food is produced that don't have a digester. I think our anaerobic digester database and map can be useful for identifying where farms are located, or farms with digesters are located. And I think that's a question that's usually analyzed in a pre-feasibility study.
We've got 3 hands up. I'll take the first one in order. Cheryl Rubel.
Hi. A couple of additional concerns. You mentioned that third parties are partnering with farms. I guess, I want to point out that those third parties are usually pretty large. You might refer to them as big oil and gas and big utility, number one, which is concerning because they benefit from these lucrative environmental commodities through these, like the California Low Carbon Fuel Standard program. I also have a concern. I'm concerned that with these deep pockets, we're monetizing manure, and the manure is going to become more valuable than the actual animal product. And there's already mounting evidence that these incentives, which are the only reason these projects are viable, that they are incentivizing concentrated animal feeding operation expansions and new constructions. You highlighted some smaller farms, but the truth of the matter is the bigger the CAFO, the better, the more manure, the better in terms of economies of scale. So a lot of us, are concerned out here, are concerned about, and of course, when you, expand CAFOs, particularly dairy CAFOs, which are preferred for these AD projects because dairy cows, lactating cows, produce a prodigious amount of manure. So, that's a concern. And then even these hub and spike that service these smaller farms, that's all, from what I've read, there's a heck of a lot of truck traffic back and forth, carrying the manure to the hub and then carrying it back to the farm. So again, I'm sorry to be the negative person here, but I think these are important questions and I appreciate your presentations. I'm trying to be convinced that, this is a good thing. Because when the dairy cows, CAFOs expand, the enteric fermentation methane increases and that kind of negates the whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, I appreciate your perspective and sharing your concerns. And, from the perspective of AgStar and our program, as Jake mentioned, anaerobic digesters are one tool in the toolbox for helping to reduce or to manage manure more sustainably. They're not right for every farm. They're often expensive for some smaller farms. And so there are a number of other practices that can be useful in reducing emissions. And, our program certainly isn't encouraging farms to grow, but it is one tool to reduce emissions and can, help reduce and manage reduce emissions and manage manure sustainably in the right context. So thank you. And, would be happy to have a follow-up conversation and learn more about your concerns.
Thank you. I would like to do that. Appreciate it.
We have another question from Paul Anderson.
Thank you, Paul Anderson from Minnesota. Kind of along the same line of Cheryl, but I do want to say I think this is an exciting potential for utilizing methane gas. And some of the larger operations around here in Minnesota will actually pipe the ingredients so they get away from a lot of the trucking and such that has been mentioned as being a possible negative to doing this. So it can be done smart, and it can be done in a way that minimizes the economic, the environmental impact. But my comment to Nick, and you did mention that there are some grants available for smaller operations, but what I've seen around here is unless you have that economy of scale, like a 5,000 head cow operation, dairy operation, it really is difficult to make these things cash flow. What do you see in terms of the size needed to make this be a viable operation around the state or around the country?
Thanks, Paul. That's a great point. And I think the challenge is it's really dependent on the farm. There's a lot of costs that go into these systems aside from just the digester technology. Often manure management systems need to be adapted to, to make the digester project work, depending on where a farm is located. If it's right next to an interstate pipeline or an energy, electricity grid, then the interconnection costs will be less. So the project cost is very variable. So it's really difficult, unfortunately, to say, what is the number of animals that makes a project feasible. And then, of course, if you're co-digesting and bringing in offsite food waste, some of the examples that I shared, the business model can work at much smaller farm sizes. So, that's something that we're looking at and trying to understand a little better ourselves with developers. What is sort of that number for farms that make this, that is like sort of the cutoff for, the economic investment in these systems. But it really varies by farm.
We have another question from Rob Kupik, and then I'll address a couple questions in the chat.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rob Kupek, a senator from Minnesota. I'm a little farther north than Representative Anderson there. And some of the, when I've brought this up in Minnesota, some of the pushback I get is around our temperature. Obviously, we live in a fairly cold climate. As it gets colder, how much, if at all, do we lose in efficiency from these projects?
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so digesters definitely need to maintain a temperature to effectively process and process the manure and food waste and produce biogas. In Minnesota, there are a number of projects, as you're aware of, and typically they'll use heat to maintain the systems. Depending on the system technology, the temperature varies. So some operate at a much higher temperature and require more energy to maintain. Some operate a little bit lower, depending on the time of year. Minnesota's summers are warm enough for many digesters to operate, but of course, the bone-chilling winters are very cold. I experienced those myself, having lived in Minnesota for 5 years, and they definitely need additional energy to maintain them. But that's should be and is part of a digester operations plan to understand and make sure that there's a system in place to maintain that temperature, ideal temperature for the system.
Okay, we have a question in the chat. I know your focus are on the benefit to farmers. Jake mentioned that 500 cows, 1,000 pigs are required to make this feasible. As a resident, I don't want more CAFOs in Michigan. Do you think biodigesters will expand the number of these large industrial farms at the expense of family farms?
Thanks. I
That's
can
from
say
Tom
that.
Kroger. Sorry.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Thank you for the question. And I can say that I am not aware of any farm that has used it, is explicitly using a digester to grow their farm operations. Farmers are primarily, the livestock is the main source of revenue for the farms. A digester and the energy can be a supplement to that.
Okay, the next question I have in the chat is from Elizabeth Holmes. For the state policies, what is EPA doing to promote the adoption of the GHG reduction approach over others?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. For the state policies, what is EPA doing to promote the adoption of the GHG reduction approach over others?
Yeah, I think if I understand the question, it's what incentives are available through EPA, and I did mention a few of them. There's the climate pollution reduction grants and the greenhouse gas reduction fund, which makes grants available to renewable energy production technologies and facilities, not just digesters, but solar, wind, other technologies. So there's some incentives there. I will note that AgStar is one program at EPA that's focused on reducing emissions from the livestock sector. We also have a number of other programs that are looking at other sectors. For example, the landfill methane outreach program provides technical assistance and support to communities looking to reduce emissions from landfills. Our EPA's Natural Gas Star program looks at helping to reduce emissions from the oil and gas sector. And through the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a new program, the Methane Emissions Reduction Program, that's also providing incentives and rules to help reduce emissions from the oil and gas operations. So EPA is looking at agriculture as well as other sectors to reduce emissions.
Becky, that's all the questions I see. I don't know if you have any others for Nick.
We may have lost his connection. He was in mid, oh, they're back. You're back, Nick. I don't know if you were able to reconnect or if that was just on my end.
It was your end.
Oh, okay. So everybody else is all on pace. Were there any other questions that you saw?
No, I don't see any other questions unless you have any.
No, it looks like other folks are connecting on their own afterwards in the
Mhm.
chat. It looks like that's what's happening. So that's a good connection to make. Well, I think we'll wrap up a little under time, which is always pleasant.
Yeah, let me, here, I'll switch it to our contact information. So here is the EPA AgStar website. Our contact information, please feel free to reach out to us. And if you're curious about anaerobic digestion, I strongly encourage you to go to the AgStar website. We have lots of educational materials and case studies, testimonials.
Well, thank you again, Nick and Jake. And to all those, please extend our thanks to everyone who's working on the AgStar program. So I also want to thank our colleagues with the Great Lakes Legislative Caucus and the MLC Energy and Environment Committee. On behalf of the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee, thank you for joining us today. We hope that you continue to engage with us through various webinars and other programming opportunities. And to all of you, have a wonderful and safe holiday season.
All right, well, that wraps it up. Thank you all for your time. Senator Francisco, thank you for making this program more efficient and smoothly run. I appreciate your expertise. And to Jake and Nick, thank you for your time and effort bringing this webinar and curtailing it to our policy aspect of looking at anaerobic digestion. Just as a reminder to our CSG, to our members, that our CSG staff is committed to assisting you in any way possible. That might be having us research various topics like this one. So if you like what you hear and if you're interested in and want some more explanation and exploration in a policy area, feel free to reach out to me. I will make sure that we post this recording to the CSG Midwest website, and I can send that link out when it's ready to go. All right, well, we are at the end of the webinar. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. You deserve a lot of the kudos for making this work well.
All right, thank you. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.